And all right, so my name is Max Chaudhary from Chaudhary Law Office, and periodically I have these webinars that are open to the public so that people can get some kind of information which may assist them for their immigration matters related to anything such as temporary status, which would include visitor visas, study permits, work permits, and also permanent resident status, which may be under the economic categories such as federal skilled trade, federal skilled worker, and entrepreneur, as well as the oversubscribed arbitrarily, it seems, the Canada Experience class. Excuse me. Just getting over a bit of a cold here. And oftentimes we get people who query me on social media asking for specific advice, and sometimes that is not appropriate because that usually requires a few questions as by way of background in relation to what their future goal is. And on social media, what tends to happen is people just say they want the visa, which is basically analogous to they want the conclusion to their visa application journey. And the problem is that there are various steps that have to be taken, and they must be done sequentially with a good foundation. And with legal matters, invariably 99% of the time, there's a foundation of documents. And so gauging the chance of success requires reviewing documentation. Sometimes people can give a précis of what they have in their possession in terms of documents or what they intend to present to the immigration authorities. And even that, however, leads to some kind of form of broken telephone when they're giving a précis of the document and maybe missing a key element of what is the thrust or the constraint that may be presented by the document, which they thought may be in their favor towards their Canadian visa goal. But with that being said, I'll just check in the chat if there's any particular question that I could try to dispose of. I don't see anything now, so that's okay. So the other aspect related to this is, I mean, while we're waiting for any question from anybody, the other aspect to this kind of idea is that there is a great deal of information about Canadian immigration on the website of Canada's official government website, and it's designed to encourage you to file an application on your own, and some applications can be filed on your own. The caveat is that the immigration department wants you to file everything on your own. And if you have a technical type of application, which requires a great deal more discretion, that is discouraged by the fact that they may not have the application forms for the more discretionary types of applications, such as a temporary resident permit, which may be required if you are found inadmissible under Canada's immigration laws. And similarly, more discretionary aspects such as some types of humanitarian and compassionate applications, which in certain situations can be done for people who are outside of Canada. But again, the structure of the website that Canada presents does not really make this apparent, because they are not expecting and do not really want to have certain types of applications easy to file, such as the two I've mentioned, temporary resident permit, as well as the humanitarian and compassionate, which is outside of Canada for certain candidates. The other general reason for reaching out for providing general information is that people try to use crowdsourcing or other websites, such as immigration fora and well-known websites like Reddit. And the phenomena can be useful in a broad sense, but oftentimes the conclusion that you would have to draw is that the question being posed is so specific with many, many parameters that you would still have to get legal advice for this. So in those situations, it's advisable to feel free to look at immigration fora and popular websites such as Reddit, and they could be useful in a qualified way, maybe to get some anecdotes about processing times for that individual. However, the processing time for that individual may not be applicable to you because there are many factors involved, such as obvious things, including the type of application that is filed, but also the time frame in which the application was commenced, where the person is residing, whether there was a sponsor, where the person is residing is their country that corresponds to their passport, or whether they have temporary status in that country, and their previous compliance with immigration laws of any country in the past. And those types of questions are highly relevant to a time frame in which an immigration or visa application can be dealt with or disposed of by the immigration authorities. And my view of the immigration fora are that even on this basic question about how long will a work permit take is affected by all of these aforementioned things, that it's difficult to see some value sometimes even for that very objective specific question. But with that being said, I'll see if there's any questions in the chat by taking a quick look right now. So there's a question relating to applying for a spousal sponsorship, but not having the marriage photos available. So in that situation, the immigration department has to balance two things, and that is, number one, the integrity of the immigration system. This is highly amplified in the context of a spousal application because, as you may know, a spousal application is one where you need not have a certain level of education or a certain type of work experience. And also, there is no obligation for the spouse to work once they come to Canada. Rather, the obligation is that their sponsor must support them for at least 3 years. So this lack of qualification in terms of education and work experience opens up the field to many types of applicants who are less educated and may not have work experience and may not have the requisite age to qualify under the other programs such as Federal Skilled Worker, Canada Experience Class, or Entrepreneur, or Federal Skilled Trades. And as such, that's why the Immigration Department, when dealing with spousal cases, has a somewhat detailed checklist, which includes, I believe, 20 photos. And they only allow 20 at the outset, presumably because they would get, I guess the colloquial term is, getting spammed with photographs in an application. So in a situation where you do not have photos, this could lead to some scrutiny, some extra scrutiny by the Immigration Department of Canada. And that scrutiny could lead to a more likelihood of having an interview rather than a waiver of an interview. So in these situations, if there is a genuine explanation for why there are no photographs at relevant times, such as the wedding itself, it's incumbent upon the applicant and the sponsor slash spouse to explain what were the reasons there are no photographs. Historically, before social media, it was a little bit easier to explain this because sometimes the camera would not work because it was not a digital camera. And there were multiple things that would have to be carried out, like appropriate flash, which was analog as well as actual photographic film. And then you would get the photographs processed, which would take between 1 day, and then 40 years ago, it may have taken 2 weeks or something of that nature. So, so one factor is, did the photos ever exist? Were they taken? Were they lost in a hard drive? If we take a look at a more recent scenario, even that would require a comprehensive explanation, because more and more platforms that offer software or hardware services have backups built in. And the phenomenon of backups in the cloud sometimes is getting more and more default. In other words, if you just have an app, sometimes there is a certain amount of free storage. So immigration officers are more aware of this evolving innovation in technology. And then you would have to cover those additional circumstances that a reasonable immigration officer would know, which is, for example, whether a reasonable immigration officer would know that it's monumentally easy to take digital photos, and it's becoming more and more easy to have photos backed up, even if you don't seem to see them in your phone, for example. So then if there is a valid explanation given by the officer, then this could assuage the officer about this concern, and then that would reduce the chance that the officer would come to the finding that the primary purpose of the marriage was for immigration purposes. Because if the officer does hold that the primary purpose of the marriage was for immigration purposes, then the application would be refused, and then you would have to appeal this at the Immigration Appeal Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board. Or if it was an inside of Canada refusal of a spousal case, you would have to appeal that at the federal court, or rather seek judicial review rather than an appeal. In other scenarios where there is an inadequate explanation for photographs, this may increase the chance of an interview of the applicant being sponsored. At that interview, the officer may confront the applicant with the question, why are there no photographs? In some cases, the officer may also pose the question by telephoning the sponsor, if the sponsor is not in the same country. Maybe the sponsor is still in Canada, and pose the same question. This prevents an interesting opportunity for the officer to pose the same question to both the person being sponsored and the sponsor. And if the answer to the question is inconsistent, this could raise a serious red flag as to whether the marriage is genuine. So in terms of summary, the bottom line is immigration has to be fair. The procedure for sponsoring has to be fair, but you have to avail yourself of that fairness by ahead of time, ahead of the concern, explaining why there are no photos. The failure to do so may lead to the application simply being returned and not even registered as filed. And this phenomena does happen more and more in situations where there is a larger workload on the part of the immigration department, and that seems to lead to a dissociation where they're more inclined to simply return an application because then they do not have to commence work on the application. That could be a very serious issue If, for example, in your sponsorship, you have included an overseas dependent who is underage, which means if they're under the age of 22, they're willing and able to qualify as a dependent child to be sponsored. But in a situation where you have filed an application and it gets returned because of a lack of photographs, then in some cases, if the child has turned 22, and then you cannot re-sponsor the child in that situation. So that can be very deleterious to the application. It means that the child is no longer a member of the family class at the time you subsequently file what is deemed to be a complete application by the immigration authorities. So that's sort of a cautionary tale about the requirement to have a complete application, including, if the application list says so, photographs. So another question is coming up, that is the time it takes to process a study visa after the application. So this is a classic need for context application, because if we look at the immigration website, which does have published processing times, the published processing times could vary from anywhere from 14 days to 70 days, depending on the passport that the applicant or the would-be study permit holder is possessing. In other words, for example, just as a brief exercise, if we take a look at the processing time for a study permit for somebody who is hailing from across the board. Okay, now I notice they've changed it. So now they're saying the standard processing time is 11 weeks. So that's an estimate by the immigration department. And the concern is that if you read the fine print on the immigration department's website, somewhere, or it used to say, but it should still say that processing time that they are presenting is for 80% of cases. So you may wonder, is your study permit application part of the 80%? It may not be part of the 80% if there is a concern about admissibility. Admissibility may relate to a physical ailment that may constitute an excessive burden on Canada's health or social services, or another basis for delay may be inadmissibility based on criminality, or in certain cases, depending on the profile, security for Canada. If, for example, you worked in a certain government position in your home country, and that country may have not had a clean, straightforward record with things such as due process for criminal investigations, or may have been mistreating people who are under investigation in that country, then that could be another source for admissibility, leading to delays in any type of application, including a study permit application. And in that situation, then the published processing time of 11 weeks for 80% of cases would not be applicable, and the application may take many months, which would necessitate all kinds of things, such as requesting a deferral from your school, or trying to work or study remotely, rather, with the school, depending on the time zone you're in. So that has a whole host of other related issues. Excuse me for just 1 second. I just have to clear my throat here. So that, I think, covers the ambit of that issue about a processing time for a particular type of application, namely study permit, and the external factors rather that may be affecting the process for that. So it looks like I don't see any other questions here. So at this point, I don't think I have to continue for today's, because for whatever reason, there's less of a turnout than usual. So at this point, I'm glad. Thanks for reaching out. And if you have a question down the road, a general question, then you can reach out to us at www.chaudharylaw.com, or you can email us directly to my assistant, clerk@chaudharylaw.com. And I think you can find us on TikTok as Toronto Immigration Lawyer, YouTube as well. If you look up Max Chaudhary, Canada Immigration Lawyer, you'll find our YouTube channel, and you'll see the perhaps 100 or so short videos which answer a whole host of things that relate to current immigration policies and processes, and as well as common questions that people are having. So I'd encourage you to look up those other sources. And I think it's also on Instagram, Max Chaudhary, Canada Immigration Lawyer as well. So, and if you're the type that frequents LinkedIn, you can also look us up there. So thanks for reaching out, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.